Before we start part 3, I'd just like to say that I was going to do this painting in 10 parts. I don't think I can stretch it to 10 parts actually. I can't say how many parts it'll be, but certainly less than 10. From now on I'll be working from my pans of watercolour. They are actually tube colour, I just fill the pans when I need to. So there are going to be some obvious colours here I'm going to use, like the orange and some of the blues. But the first thing I want to do is to define the form of the bird and the post. The shape we already have, which is the pencil drawing, but the form is the three-dimensional look. So we're thinking of the darks, and there's two darks particularly I'm going to use. This one up here, which is neutral tint, and on this side I have a warmer dark, which is a sepia, and I'm going to use this to underpaint the orange feathers. The brushes I'm going to use are synthetic. They are good quality, made by Escoda from Spain, but any good synthetic brush will do, as long as they come to a fine or reasonably fine point. So let's get on. I've zoomed in tight on the Kingfisher's head because I like to start with that first and get the eye and the bill convincing. And if we look back, all we have drawn in are the feather groups, and because they are groups we can paint these individually, but we need some softness in our brush marks because these are feathers. So one way of doing it is to take some clean water and re-wet the paper, just keeping in within the area of each feather group. So we'll start with the blue one at the top and carefully paint this using a number 10 brush, and make sure none of the dark colour is going to bleed into the background or onto the white or orange feathers. So that's fine. And because it's dark, actually because it's dark around the eye here, I'm going to wet that because I don't mind the dark bleeding into those feathers because they are dark. Okay. So now I'll use, because they're blue, I'm going to use some of the neutral tint. You could use Payne's Grey or even indigo. I'm going to drop down a size of brush to an 8 and put this shading in with the neutral tint. I've gone wrong already. That's marvellous, isn't it? First bit of painting and I get it wrong. They are orange feathers. So I'm just going to lift those out with some tissue while that's all still wet, and see if I can just soften that a little bit. I tried not to make any mistakes, but just keep focused on which feathers, which feather groups you're working on. Now obviously where I want the brightest colours, I don't want any paint. So what we could do is to lift some of this back, or actually it's better to bring it this way. If you bring the water this way, you bring the light down into the dark feathers. If you take the blend that way, then you take the dark up into the light area. So depending on what you're trying to do, in this case we're trying to focus that down into the dark area. To lift out, just clean your brush or dry your brush with a tissue, and you can lift the colour out. Just work away with this to get a sort of a shading effect with no hard edges. Now the feathers under here are white, so I'm going to use the neutral tint as well, just to add some shadow to them. And this is the second way you can blend, and that's to keep the area dry and then paint into it with your darker colour. I'm going to take it, there are sort of shadows up under here. Bring that down a little bit until it's out into the light, as it were. Here though we have a hard edge. Now, if you clean your brush and just squeeze the moisture out of it, not all of it, but most of it, you'll be able to it will absorb some of that paint into the brush, and it'll make it thinner, and you can just bring it down. The thing is, you have to keep cleaning your brush because it's taking up the paint into the brush. See, so that's now, that paint is lightened, but it's up in the brush, so you can then clean the brush and repeat the drying and just soften that out. So again, you get a gradual look. Sometimes you'll find it easier to work one way, other times you'll find it easier to work another. And I'm going to switch to the sepia to paint the orange feathers, and the only orange feathers in the head are just here. And I'm not going to re-wet this, but I'm just going to try and get some shape in here for these feathers. And again, I've used the technique of painting onto the dry paper and then just ease it back with a damp clean brush. Clean the brush and dry it, ease it back again, and then I'm going to repeat that for this here. Okay. Now again, I've gone slightly adrift here because I'm going to have the light coming from above, but I guess from the front as well. So these feathers here need to be lighter. So, you know, this is watercolour, I know, but you can just take a clean tissue and just remove that. So don't be afraid too much of making mistakes. But just try and stay focused a bit. So when we're happy with that, we can turn our attention to the log, and I can go back to my number 10 brush, or even a number 12. Now this is a different technique I use here. I want to do an overall loose painting, like another background if you like, before I get to the detail. But I'm going to take into account the light and the shade as well. So what I'm going to do is to re-wet this area, taking care not to wet any of the background or any of the bird. So now I can just dip in and out of my palette. First of all, I might just use some of the sepia to paint in here. Now it's not so critical this time, because I've got no feather groups or anything precise. There's more randomness to this than there is to the bird. So I'm just going to think of the shape more than anything else, which is a round. So my brush marks are going to follow that sort of shape. And with some dark and lights, it gives you a sense of form straight away. I'm just going to switch brushes for a number 8 and just flick some clear water onto this, and hopefully you'll see it sort of bloom a little bit and add a bit of texture. It's the randomness that's the important thing. Before you do any more, just let this bit dry. When everything is perfectly dry, we can turn our attention back to the Kingfisher, and what we're going to do now is to paint the bill and the eye. These are not soft textures, so we need to work a little differently, and we need to work close up. I'm going to first start with the bill, and it's important that you use a brush that comes to a point, because we need to paint the tip of the bill and it would lose a lot of character if the paintwork here is a little lumpy. You know, it needs to be as fine as you can paint it. So I'm going to start with some cobalt blue, just mixed into a little wash, and I'm using a number 4 brush here on my picture. And I'm taking care now with the point of the brush. Hold it that way, not that way. And then apply a little pressure and just pull the brush back to get that blue-grey. So now I'm going to turn my attention to the eye itself, and this is going to be the darkest dark. Now this wants to be a fairly strong mix, and I'm going to paint in carefully the shape of the eye, and this time I'm going to hold my brush like this, but when it's touching the paper is just push the edge of the brush back to the pencil line. Try and keep this shape as neat as you can. Well, that's it for part 3. In part 4 we'll be putting the first colours on the Kingfisher. So goodbye for now.